People in Trump's camp finally admitted why. At first, they promised Ukraine a license to produce Patriot missiles, but then they suddenly got scared of that decision and started denying that license. American journalist Michael Weiss from The Atlantic published an article with a direct conclusion. On one hand, Ukraine has become significantly stronger and more independent, so granting it a license to produce Patriot interceptor missiles may not be as beneficial for Ukraine itself, but rather for the United States of America and their defense industry. They say these could be large capacities and Ukraine could cover its own needs, but on the other hand, the real reason for the delay in granting the license immediately becomes clear. It turned out that the companies Raytheon and Lockheed Martin officially say they are concerned about alleged intellectual property theft. But in reality, they are afraid that Ukrainians will set up production faster and, importantly, cheaper than American factories, and the orders will go to Ukraine. At the same time, the White House is concerned that since Ukraine has stopped being a supplicant for aid and today does not receive anything for free from the US at all, Donald Trump has practically no leverage left to pressure Kyiv. My name is Alexei Pichi, and let's discuss this topic together. There have been some very interesting insights, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. We are approaching the 300,000 subscriber mark, so check right now. Maybe you watch my videos but for some reason haven't subscribed yet. Under this video, click the subscribe button if you haven't done so already. If you have, thank you very much. So, let's start with the timeline of the decision regarding the license to produce Patriot missiles in Ukraine, because it is quite telling on its own. After meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky on July 28, Donald Trump hinted that Ukraine might be able to obtain licenses to produce Patriot interceptor missiles. But just 2 days later, he tried to dispel any positive expectations by stating that Washington should exercise caution. On August 8, Volodymyr Zelensky once again hinted that Trump had nevertheless agreed to grant this license for Patriot missiles, although the White House has not publicly confirmed this yet. And now The Atlantic notes that Trump's attitude toward Ukraine has actually never been favorable, but from time to time he is ready to do something good for it. And then another call from Vladimir Putin or a visit by Stephen Witkoff to Moscow, and all this once again fuels his hostility toward Kyiv. But this time, Donald Trump's caution is not connected to Vladimir Putin, because let me remind you, it's already been a month since that moment when Donald Trump publicly promised to call Vladimir Putin, but he still hasn't called and hasn't explained anything at all. Let me remind you, on July 8 in Ankara during the NATO summit, during a meeting with Vladimir Zelensky, Trump publicly stated that he would talk to Zelensky, then come out and immediately call Vladimir Putin. Even then, Peskov said that yes, we are waiting for this call, Vladimir Putin is ready for talks, but more than a month has passed and no one has called anyone. Putin was simply ignored. The real reason for the hesitation, which The Atlantic itself reveals citing American officials, is something else. According to the publication's source, the creators of the Patriot system officially explained this concern as the theft of intellectual property. We'll transfer the technology to someone else. But the real reason, as the publication writes, is competition. And next, I'll quote them. They are concerned that Ukrainians will find a way to improve the Patriot and then produce them on a large scale, faster and for much less money than the existing production lines in the US can. The publication takes the point further. When the war is over, Ukraine will be able to produce surplus Patriot missiles for use in the US or for resale to the United States allies and partners. Given its track record, Ukraine might even be able to produce surpluses while the war is still raging. And this could be a huge problem for manufacturers inside the US. American factories are actually seeing that Ukraine is finding a fairly cheap solution in drones and missiles, and they fear that even the Patriot missile in the hands of Ukrainians could become cheaper to produce. So basically, the companies have just admitted that today the cost of the Patriot missile is very much inflated, overblown, and they understand that with the right approach its production can be made cheaper, and that's what they're afraid of, that Ukrainians will actually do it. So they'll get the license, start producing, and it will turn out that there are ways to save money and cut costs somewhere. And it turns out that this missile isn't worth the price that Raytheon and Lockheed Martin are selling them for in the US. Even with a license for large-scale production, it will take Ukraine years. The Ukrainians have active development programs for almost everything we need, and our intention is to be completely self-sufficient in the future. But for now, Ukraine almost completely relies on its allies for interceptors. Currently, only Japan and Germany have licenses to produce Patriot missiles outside the United States. If Ukraine also gets such a license, it will solve the last issue of Ukraine's dependence on external supplies. But actually, besides Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, there is also Boeing, which flatly refuses to transfer its technological component. The thing is that the technical crux of this whole story about licensing the production of Patriot missiles is a specific top-secret component which the Telegraph is writing about today. The basis of Kyiv's desperate effort to obtain the Patriot is a small radar made by Boeing. Boeing in Alabama, known as the PAC-3 Ka-band active radar seeker. This is, as they say, the eyes and ears of the interceptor missile. It detects an incoming missile in the final seconds and fractions of a second of flight and guides the Patriot to a direct collision, resulting in the destruction of that ballistic missile. This component is so advanced that the White House restricts its export even to its closest allies. Therefore, denying Ukraine access to it could become a matter of survival, but there is a workaround. Boeing will simply supply this specific component to Ukraine, and Ukraine will assemble the missile itself, meaning it won't produce these radars on its own. And I should note that even Japan, which has a license, took 3 years to achieve the first successful test of the PAC-3 missile. According to analysts' expectations, Ukraine will face roughly the same timelines, although according to some analysts, this process could be sped up to 1 year. Well, because Japan didn't have an emergency situation, they could afford to assemble this missile calmly and leisurely, launch it, test it, and so on. We don't have that kind of time. And here is retired General Phil Breedlove. This is the former commander of the US European Command, mentions another real concern inside the Trump administration. Quote, I really believe that there are concerns that if we transfer this technology to Ukraine, it will somehow end up in Russia. And here, a source close to Donald Trump confirmed to the Telegraph that the administration allegedly already knows about cases when weapons supplied to Ukraine by allies ended up on the European black market. In fact, this issue has been raised several times throughout the full-scale war, but I have not seen any evidence, any reports that would clearly confirm this information. Yes, there were a lot of rumors that these weapons were appearing on the black market, that these weapons were showing up somewhere in the Middle East and so on, but there wasn't a single report. If you found one, I would appreciate it if you could share this information with me on my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link is in the description of this video, so please subscribe. So if you find any reports that have conducted an investigation and actually revealed something real, if you find that Western weapons supplied to the armed forces of Ukraine ended up on the black market, I would appreciate it. But nevertheless, this is also mentioned as an argument. Plus, there's the question of where to physically assemble these missiles. Manufacturing on Ukrainian territory would make the plant a primary target for the savage Russians. Therefore, the new interceptors will most likely be produced in Germany or in some other European country, for example in Poland. This idea is supported by, do you know who? The United States Under-Secretary of Defense for Policy, Elbridge Colby, the very same one who, at the beginning of Donald Trump's presidential term, his second one, was completely opposed to any support for Ukraine. This is the person who froze our intelligence sharing and so on and so on. And now, the main point from the Atlantic, which Donald Trump is also afraid of, Ukraine is no longer a petitioner for help. Ukraine's military position is stronger than it has been in recent years. It produces a significant portion of its weapons independently, holds back Russia's offensive, and is even reclaiming territories. And the war has been moved onto the territory of the Russian Federation. The publication calls Ukraine, quote, a model ally. Well, borrowing a term that Under-Secretary of Defense Elbridge Colby used for Israel. And now the Finnish company Blackbird Group has calculated that in July of last year, Russian troops captured almost 5 times more territory than in July of this year. And in February and June of 2026, Russia actually lost more territory than it captured. As of today, more than 80% of losses in the war are caused by drones, most of which Ukraine produces itself. And last month, Kyiv approved the export of weapons and technologies for the first time since the beginning of the invasion, because it is already producing more than it can afford to purchase itself. At the same time, Donald Trump's main sources of leverage over Kyiv are gradually fading, and interestingly, he himself built such a policy that now in fact he can no longer directly influence Kyiv's decisions very much. According to the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, in the first year of his second term, Trump reduced new U.S. military aid commitments to Ukraine by 99%. Now, Europe is mainly paying for the war, and the amount of aid through the NATO mechanism was less than $7 billion compared to, attention, $127 billion allocated under Joe Biden. The only thing the US still gives Ukraine for free is intelligence data, including target packages for strikes against Russia. Ukraine also became one of the few allies to stand up for the US in the war against Iran by sending technical consultants with the SkyMap system to the region to detect Iranian drones. So the bottom line: the connection between the wars in Iran and Ukraine has been demonstrated. It showed that the recipient of military aid from the US, that is Ukraine, can also be a supplier of military aid to the United States itself. Remember how Trump insisted and said, no, we don't need help from Ukraine. What interceptors, what drones, what are you even talking about? It's all nonsense. Later he admitted, oh, well, yes, they have good interceptors, so we really did use them. And now the main question is, does Donald Trump himself and his administration understand that Ukraine is already in a completely different position? This is not the same Ukraine begging for aid. Trump has no leverage to say either you do this or what exactly? I'll stop the aid, which doesn't exist anyway. Oh, I won't give you Patriot missiles, which I'm not giving you anyway. So, what leverage does Trump have now? If you look at the whole dynamic, a year earlier, Trump could try to talk down to Zelensky and put pressure on him. Say that you have no cards, that you should just give up territories. Now that kind of rhetoric is gone. Well, because now there are cards to play. But one thing is clear, in the US they are obviously already wary of an overly strong Ukraine. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone. To be continued.